Okay, let's go. Number 1. The Big Void. Imagine you are watching a screen in a control room when the data comes back from inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. You have placed 3 separate detector arrays inside the pyramid and around its base nuclear emulsion films, muon telescope detectors, scintillator hodoscopes, each one working on a different physical principle, each one measuring the same thing in a different way, so that no single instrument error can account for what all 3 simultaneously show. You've been waiting months for the particle counts to accumulate into an image. And when the density maps of 4,500 tons of limestone finally resolve, there is something where the limestone should be. A space, approximately 98 feet long, running north of the Grand Gallery. At a position no survey in the history of Egyptology has ever recorded a room. That is what Kunihiro Morishima of Nagoya University and his colleagues saw in 2017, and it is sitting untouched above one of the most studied structures on Earth right now. The Scan Pyramids project was launched in 2016 by a consortium that included the HIP Institute in France, Nagoya University, and the High Energy Accelerator Research Organization (KEK) in Japan, and Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities. Their detection method was muon radiography. Muons are subatomic particles generated in enormous quantities when cosmic rays collide with the upper atmosphere. They pass through solid matter, even solid rock and stone, but denser material absorbs them faster. By placing detector arrays inside the pyramid and tracking where muons accumulate versus where they are absorbed, the team could produce a density image of the pyramid's interior the way a CT scanner images a body, from the outside, without removing a single stone. The technique had been used successfully in volcanoes and nuclear reactors. The Great Pyramid was the most ambitious target yet attempted. The 3 detector systems were calibrated independently and placed in sequence to maximize overlap. Any anomaly appearing in only one system would be dismissed as instrumental artifact. All 3 had to agree. They agreed. The findings were published November 2nd, 2017, in Nature, under the title Discovery of a Big Void in Khufu's Pyramid by Observation of Cosmic Ray Muons. The void, approximately 98 feet in length, positioned above and north of the Grand Gallery, in a region where no passage, chamber, or construction feature had ever been documented. Its width and height remain uncertain. The muon imaging provides length measurements more precisely than cross-sectional dimensions, but the data indicates a volume consistent with a significant architectural space. For scale, the Grand Gallery, the pyramid's most famous interior corridor, runs 154 feet in length at a height of 28 feet. Its 7-layer corbelled limestone walls, rising to a vault above the passage to the king's chamber. The newly found void is comparable in length to that space. It is not a crack in the stone, it is a room. It is approximately the same size as the most architecturally sophisticated passage already known inside the pyramid, and it has been there for 4,500 years without appearing on any plan. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities acknowledged the discovery publicly. Former Antiquities Minister Zahi Hawass described the finding as important and confirmed it would require further study. What the ministry did not authorize was physical access, no drilling, no camera probe, no interior investigation of any kind beyond continued remote sensing. Subsequent requests from the Scan Pyramids team for entry permission have not produced authorization. As of 2024, the void has not been entered. Not a mortar drill, not a fiber-optic camera, nothing. The mainstream architectural interpretation offers 2 plausible explanations. The first is that the void is an undiscovered stress-relieving construction feature, a gap built above the Grand Gallery to reduce compressive load on it, analogous to the 5 known relieving chambers stacked above the king's chamber. The second is that it represents a sealed construction space, a void left by an internal logistics system, possibly an internal ramp sealed as the exterior casing was completed. Mark Lehner, of Ancient Egypt Research Associates, one of the leading Giza construction specialists, has published extensively on internal ramp theories consistent with this kind of sealed interior feature. These are reasonable proposals from serious researchers. The pyramid was built by an estimated 20,000 to 30,000 organized workers over approximately 20 years. The workforce was capable of extraordinary deliberate complexity. The 5 existing relieving chambers above the king's chamber are themselves evidence that the builders understood certain spaces required engineered weight, distribution, and planned for it in advance. Some researchers ask whether the void's position directly above the Grand Gallery rather than above the King's Chamber, where structural relief would be most logically needed, suggests it was not incidental construction management, but deliberate architectural placement. A space the same approximate size as the most sophisticated passage in the pyramid, placed in direct geometric relationship to it, not a byproduct. A counterpart. The particle physics is not contested. The Nature paper passed peer review. The void exists. The question the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities has declined to answer, not by stating a reason against entry, but by declining to authorize one, is what a 98-foot sealed space at that precise location was designed to do, and why. In 2024, with the instruments to find it and the researchers ready to enter it, the door has remained closed. The void is not the only sealed space inside this pyramid. It is not even the only sealed door. Number 2. The second sealed door. The Queen's Chamber sits in the middle of the Great Pyramid, roughly halfway between the base and the King's Chamber above it. It is smaller than the King's Chamber, finished in limestone rather than granite, and for most of its documented history was considered a secondary or abandoned space, not the primary burial chamber, but a way station or a decoy. What it actually contains, built into its northern and southern walls, are two narrow shafts that travel deep into the pyramid at steep angles. Each shaft is approximately 8 inches wide by 8 inches tall, the width of a man's shoulder. The shafts were plastered over in antiquity and not discovered until 1872. For the next 121 years, no one looked very far inside them. In 1993, a German robotics engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink changed that. Gantenbrink had been contracted by the German Archaeological Institute to install a ventilation system inside the pyramid to reduce humidity damage in the King's Chamber. As part of that work, he built a small robot Upuat-2, roughly the size of a briefcase on treads capable of traversing the shaft's confined dimensions. On March 22, 1993, Upuat-2 was sent up the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber. It traveled 213 feet into the pyramid at an angle of 39.5 degrees, ascending through solid limestone, before its camera resolved something at the end. A polished limestone slab fitted across the shaft. The slab had 2 copper handles, one on each side, set into metal pins embedded in the stone. A sealed door. At the end of a shaft too narrow for a human being to enter, 213 feet inside one of the most studied structures in the world, sat a door with handles placed there, very deliberately, by the people who built the pyramid. Copper handles. Not a dead end, not a rough-cut block. Handles. The kind of fitting you put on a door you intended, at some point, for someone to grip. Gantenbrink's footage was extraordinary. What followed it was institutional conflict. The Egyptian authorities declared that Gantenbrink had violated proper reporting protocol and made the findings public without authorization. Gantenbrink stated he had followed the agreed procedure. The dispute meant that the footage, which Gantenbrink released independently, became the subject of competing claims. Official investigation of what the door might conceal was delayed for nearly a decade. In 2002, the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities, under Zahi Hawass, partnered with National Geographic to mount a new expedition. The robot was called Pyramid Rover, built using iRobot technology. On September 17, 2002, in a live broadcast, Pyramid Rover drilled through the lower edge of Gantenbrink's limestone door. The camera slid through the gap. Behind the first door was a 7-inch space, roughly 7 inches of open air, and then a second sealed stone slab. The camera photographed the second slab and the small cavity between the 2 doors. Inside that cavity, a small collection of ancient objects on the floor, 2 corroded copper implements, and what appeared to be a wooden artifact. Their exact nature was not determinable from the camera angle. The second limestone slab showed no obvious mechanism, no handles on the visible face, no identifying markings. Pyramid Rover could not proceed further. Its drill had been sized for the first door. The second door required a new mission. That mission has not happened. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities did not authorize follow-up entry after the 2002 broadcast. Subsequent applications to investigate the second door, the artifacts in the 7-inch cavity, or whatever lies beyond, have not received approval. As of 2024, The second door remains exactly as the camera found it in 2002. The mainstream Egyptological interpretation, developed most fully by Kate Spence of Cambridge University and Juan Antonio Belmonte of the Instituto de Astrofísica de Canarias, holds that the shafts were not ventilation passages, but astronomical aligners. The northern shaft of the Queen's Chamber aligns to the star Thuban as it appeared in 2500 BCE. The southern shaft aligns to Orion's belt. The shafts were sealed in antiquity because they were ceremonial structures built to connect the pyramid's interior to specific points in the sky. The doors are the ceremonial terminals, the sky's endpoint in stone, permanently closed by design. This is a credible interpretation. Sealed ceremonial structures are well documented in Egyptian religious practice. Some researchers ask whether sealed ceremonial shafts require copper handles on their terminal slabs, and if not, why these ones have them. Copper handles are functional hardware. They are gripping points, the kind of feature you install on a door you intended at some point for someone to open. The question of why a ceremonially sealed shaft needs a mechanism for reopening, and what the wooden and copper objects in the 7-inch cavity were placed there to do, and what occupies the space behind the second limestone slab. These are questions the astronomical alignment theory does not resolve. It explains why the shafts point where they point. It does not explain the hardware. The first door was behind a plastered-over wall for 4,500 years. The second door has been behind the first door for 22 years and behind an institutional refusal for the same length of time. 45 kilometers south, the third pyramid on this list was thought to have no more secrets either. It was wrong about that. Number 3. The Bent Pyramid's Hidden Cavity. 28 miles south of Giza, at Dashur, stands the pyramid that changed its mind halfway up. The Bent Pyramid was built by Pharaoh Sneferu Khufu's father around 2600 BCE, and its silhouette is immediately recognizable. Its lower section rises at a 54-degree angle, then roughly halfway up, the incline abruptly shifts to 43 degrees, and the pyramid finishes at a shallower slope. The result is a bent profile, visibly kinked against the desert sky. The standard explanation is structural crisis. Internal cracks appeared in the chambers during construction. The builders responded by changing the angle to reduce compressive load, and the pyramid was completed at the safer gradient. Not abandoned. Adapted. Finished. That narrative makes the Bent Pyramid one of the most readable buildings in Egyptian architecture, a pyramid whose construction problems are visible from the road, whose emergency response is written into its own shape. It also made it seem like one of the most thoroughly understood. Unlike the Great Pyramid, with its vast sealed interior, the Bent Pyramid has 2 original entrance corridors, 2 main corbelled chambers connected by an internal passage, and a relatively transparent architectural logic. Researchers and tourists have accessed its interior for decades. Egyptologists considered it, in a sense, a solved case, the pyramid whose secrets had already been exposed by its own structural transparency. In 2019, the Scan Pyramids project established that assumption was not true. The Scan Pyramids Consortium, the HIP Institute, Nagoya University, the High Energy Accelerator Research Organization, KEK, and Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities had been running muon detector arrays inside the Bent Pyramid since 2016. 3 independent detection technologies, each calibrated separately. Any anomaly requiring report had to appear across all 3 systems. By 2019, the accumulated data was ready to publish. The announcement detailed 2 newly identified structural anomalies. The first was a small cavity near the upper chevron stones on the pyramid's north face, the large angled limestone slabs placed above pyramid entrances to deflect weight. The second anomaly was located deeper within the pyramid's mass, at a position inconsistent with any chamber, passage, or architectural feature in the known record. Not a variation of something already mapped. Something in a location no existing plan showed as occupied. What the Scan Pyramids team declined to publish deliberately was the exact location and estimated dimensions of the deeper cavity. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities and the project leadership gave a practical reason. Publishing precise coordinates of an unexcavated anomaly inside an accessible pyramid would invite unauthorized access. The decision to withhold specifics was itself a disclosure. The authorities considered the finding real enough to protect. The ministry authorized continued scanning. It did not authorize drilling, excavation, or physical entry into either anomaly. No entry has been made. The mainstream structural interpretation proposes that both anomalies are consistent with the bent pyramid's known construction history. Corbelling, the stepped overhang technique used to span chambers without flat arches, can leave irregular open spaces between construction courses that are not chambers, but structural gaps. The pyramid's mid-construction crisis is also well documented. Cracks appeared, the builders stabilized the structure from inside, and secondary voids consistent with emergency packing or partial internal collapse could plausibly exist in zones the crisis affected. A structural byproduct of a known emergency, in a pyramid already understood to have experienced structural problems. Unremarkable. But the deeper anomaly sits, by the Scan Pyramids team's own description, outside the zone of the known structural crisis. Not in the region where the cracks appeared, not above the chambers where the corbelling would produce gaps. In a part of the pyramid the crisis did not reach, and that 2 decades of detailed architectural surveys had not recorded as containing anything. Some researchers ask whether a pyramid thought to be fully mapped, studied for longer and more systematically than almost any other structure in Egypt, precisely because its structural crisis made its interior so accessible, could have maintained a sealed space outside the known architectural record simply because no one had applied the right technology to look. The Scan Pyramids muon arrays found the Great Pyramid's 98-foot void in 2017. They found the Bent Pyramid's cavity in 2019. Both discoveries were in buildings that had been studied for over a century. Both appeared in locations where no chamber had been recorded. The question the cavity raises is not merely what is inside it. It is how many other assumed complete pyramids are keeping the same kind of secret. The Bent Pyramid bent to survive. Whatever it is hiding inside, the deeper anomaly has not had to adapt at all. It has simply waited while the science caught up. A Nobel laureate with a particle physics detector tried to answer that question for the pyramid next door at Giza 49 years ago. What he found and what he didn't is still being worked through. Number 4. The Pyramid of Khafre's contested interior. In 1968, one of the most decorated physicists in the world aimed the most advanced imaging technology of his era at the second largest pyramid at Giza, and tried to settle the hidden chamber question once and for all. Luis Alvarez had won the Nobel Prize in Physics that same year for his work with liquid hydrogen bubble chambers and the discovery of fundamental subatomic resonance states. He was not a man who entertained imprecision. When he proposed using cosmic ray muon detection to scan the interior of the Pyramid of Khafre, the idea was serious science. The same detection principle the Scan Pyramids project would apply to Khufu 49 years later, proposed and executed at a time when the technology to do it had only just become available. The project was a joint effort between the University of California, Berkeley, Ain Shams University in Cairo, and the Atomic Energy Establishment of Egypt. Muon detectors, spark chambers filled with wire grids, were installed in Belzoni's chamber, a known passage inside Khafre. The detectors recorded muon arrivals from above over an extended measurement period, building a density map of the pyramid's volume above them. The expectation was clear. Hidden chambers would appear as regions of lower density, more muons passing through than through equivalent thicknesses of solid limestone. The study was published in Science in 1970 under the title Search for Hidden Chambers in the Pyramids. The conclusion: no chambers of significant size were found in the portion of the pyramid surveyed above the detector position. The Pyramid of Khafre, Alvarez and his colleagues concluded, contained no concealed volumes larger than those already known. That should have closed the question. It did not quite manage to do so. The complication was in the data itself. During the project, the team noted statistical irregularities in the muon arrival patterns, variations between scans of the same pyramidal sector larger than measurement uncertainty could account for. The 1970 paper acknowledged the anomalies and attributed them to probable structural heterogeneity in the limestone, different courses of stone having different densities in ways that produced variation without indicating open space. The detectors of 1968 were designed to identify large voids. They could not reliably distinguish a smaller chamber from a density variation in ancient masonry. That limitation was known. It was a technology boundary, not a methodology failure. The technology has changed considerably since 1968. The muon detector arrays deployed by the Scan Pyramids project in 2016 and 2017 used nuclear emulsion films and scintillator hodoscopes detection systems with spatial resolution orders of magnitude greater than the spark chambers Alvarez used. When Scan Pyramids applied this capability to Khufu's Great Pyramid, they found a 98-foot void that the 1968-era instruments would have been very unlikely to resolve, precisely because the earlier technology's angular resolution was insufficient for features below a certain size threshold. A room the dimensions of the Grand Gallery was invisible to 1968 instruments. The Scan Pyramids Consortium has applied for equivalent resolution access to Khafre. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities has not granted it at the same level as access to Khufu, citing ongoing structural preservation priorities and research management protocols. A 2021 study by a joint Egyptian and international team published in the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports used ground-penetrating radar to survey subsurface areas around Khafre's base and causeway. The study identified anomalies in multiple sectors inconsistent with known architectural features. The authors interpreted these cautiously, noting that surface GPR cannot reliably image interior pyramid structure at depth, but their presence added to an unresolved picture. The mainstream Egyptological position on Khafre is straightforward. Its known chambers, the burial chamber, the lower chamber, and Belzoni's descending passage represent the complete interior. The Alvarez study, the most rigorous interior investigation ever completed, found no hidden volumes. Any data irregularities reflect limestone density variation, not concealed space. That position is defensible. Alvarez applied real physics to a real question and published what he found. Some researchers ask whether a study conducted with instruments incapable of resolving a feature the size of the Grand Gallery can be considered a definitive negative result for a pyramid the size of Khafre, and whether the decision not to grant Scan Pyramids equivalent access to Khafre as it received for Khufu represents scientific caution or a preference for a settled answer over a potentially unsettling one. The Great Pyramid's 98-foot void was invisible to 1968 technology and was found in 2017. The parallel question for Khafre is not whether Alvarez was right or wrong. It is whether the instruments he had were capable of finding what newer instruments might find and why, 55 years later, those newer instruments have not been turned on his pyramid to the same degree. The Pyramid of Khafre is taller than the Great Pyramid, as seen from many vantage points. It retains its original limestone casing stones at the apex, the only pyramid at Giza that does. It is the most visually dominant structure on the plateau, and it is the one that hasn't been scanned at the resolution that found the void next door. 250 miles south, the oldest stone building ever constructed is sitting above miles of galleries that its architect sealed, and some of which have never been opened. Number 5. The Step Pyramid's sealed underworld. The Step Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara is the oldest monumental stone building ever constructed by human hands. Not one of the oldest, the oldest. Built approximately 2650 BCE, under the direction of a man named Imhotep, chancellor and high priest to Pharaoh Djoser. It was the first structure in Egypt to use cut limestone as a primary construction material at scale, the first to stack courses of stone into a true monumental form, the first to be designed as a unified architectural statement rather than a mounded pile. Imhotep is one of the only non-royal Egyptians whose actual name and title survived the millennia intact. He was eventually deified, worshipped as a god of medicine and architecture for centuries after his death. The structure he designed is still standing at Saqqara, visible from Cairo on a clear day. What most people visiting Saqqara do not see is what he put underneath it. Directly below the pyramid, carved into the bedrock, is a shaft 92 feet deep. At the bottom of that shaft is the burial chamber, a granite-lined room assembled from 3.5-ton blocks of pink Aswan granite, transported from more than 500 miles to the south. That chamber connects outward through a network of corridors. Those corridors connect to more chambers, more galleries, more passages. The total documented length of the underground network beneath the Step Pyramid complex is approximately 3.5 miles of corridors and carved rooms. Sections of those corridors contain rooms tiled in blue faience, a glazed ceramic designed to simulate the reed mat walls of royal palace apartments carved in bas-relief with running djed pillars and the iconography of eternal renewal. Someone built a replica of the royal palace underground and lined it with the symbols of rebirth. French Egyptologist Jean-Philippe Lauer arrived at Saqqara in 1926 to begin what would become a 75-year career at the site, the longest sustained archaeological engagement with a single monument in modern Egyptological history. Lauer mapped the accessible portions of the underground network systematically, documented the architectural sequence, and identified sections that remained blocked by ancient collapse or deliberate sealing. When he died in 2001 at the age of 98, he had not finished the work. Sections of the gallery system he identified as requiring excavation had not been cleared. They remain uncleared. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities launched a major restoration project for the Step Pyramid complex in 2006, which included structural reinforcement of the pyramid above ground and continued archaeological work in the underground sections. The restoration encountered significant structural instability in portions of the underground gallery's segments where ancient limestone had partially collapsed inward, creating unsupported sections requiring careful stabilization before further excavation could proceed. Access to deeper gallery sections was restricted during this work, and portions of the complex previously accessible to researchers were closed. The timeline for full reopening of those sections has not been publicly confirmed. But the structure that makes the Step Pyramid's underground world specifically strange is not the main gallery system beneath the pyramid itself. It is the southern tomb. In the southern section of the Djoser complex's surrounding enclosure, a walled rectangle nearly a mile in perimeter, stands a low mastaba-style structure called the Southern Tomb. It is a separate building from the pyramid, positioned across the enclosed courtyard. It has its own underground shaft, descending approximately 92 feet, the same depth as the main shaft beneath the pyramid. At the bottom of its shaft is its own network of corridors. Those corridors also contain rooms tiled in blue faience, with the same djed and hebsed iconography as the rooms beneath the pyramid. Not similar iconography, not a related program, the same program. The Southern Tomb is, in structural terms, a second version of the monument directly to its north. Same depth, same decorative language, same apparent purpose, built for one pharaoh, in one complex, at one time. No body was ever found in the Southern Tomb. No canopic jars, no burial equipment, no funerary objects consistent with an actual royal interment were recovered from its chambers when first accessed. The two deepest chambers of the Southern Tomb remain blocked by ancient stone that has not been cleared since Lauer's surveys identified them in the mid-20th century. Mainstream Egyptologists offer two primary explanations. The first is the Ka-tomb theory. The Southern Tomb was built to house a statue or symbolic presence of the pharaoh's spiritual double, allowing Djoser to exist simultaneously in two sacred locations. The second is the ceremonial court theory. It served a ritual function related to the Hebsed Jubilee architecture in the surrounding complex, never intended as a burial site. Some researchers ask whether a symbolic or ceremonial structure would require the same engineering specification as the tomb itself, the same 92-foot shaft depth, the same Aswan granite-lined lower chambers, the same sealed blocking stones at the deepest level, and if not, what purpose the structural equivalence between the two systems actually served. Symbolic spaces in Egyptian religious architecture were typically indicated by iconography and surface treatment. This space was built to the same tolerance as the thing it supposedly only symbolized. Imhotep designed the world's oldest stone building. Below it runs 3.5 miles of sealed corridors. At the far end of the enclosure, he built a second version of the entire system and put the same door at the bottom. The world's first architect left two underground complexes at Saqqara. One has been excavated. The other's deepest chambers are still behind their original blocking stones. Across the Atlantic, a sealed entrance in a courtyard floor at one of Mesoamerica's greatest cities was waiting to be noticed for nearly 2,000 years. Number 6. The Feathered Serpent's Mercury Chamber. Picture what it looks like to find a sealed entrance that someone has tried to make invisible. In 2003, during routine maintenance work at Teotihuacan in central Mexico, an archaeologist named Sergio Gomez Chavez noticed a depression in the stone floor of the courtyard, in front of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Beneath the depression was a cover, a heavy stone fitted into the floor, and over it, a layer of fine pyrite powder had been deliberately sprinkled. Pyrite powder, gold-colored mineral dust scattered across a sealed entrance to make it look like undisturbed floor. Someone, approximately 1800 years before Gomez arrived, had gone to meaningful effort to obscure this door. Gomez, a researcher with INAH, Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, applied for an excavation permit. What he found when that permit was granted is still not fully understood. The tunnel beneath the courtyard floor is 340 feet long, running north toward the base of the temple and descending to a level roughly 46 feet below the pyramid's surface. Someone had dug it through solid rock, lined portions of its ceiling and walls, and then filled it with approximately 1,000 tons of earth, stone, and rubble before sealing the entrance above. Dating of organic material within the fill places the closure at approximately 200 CE, meaning the tunnel was sealed roughly 1,800 years before Gomez found it. The excavation took 8 years of active digging, from 2009 to 2017. Workers systematically removed the fill by hand, using techniques designed to preserve stratigraphy, the sequential layering of archaeological deposits that records how a space was used over time. What they removed as they went: thousands of individual objects embedded throughout the fill, ritual offerings placed as part of the tunnel's deliberate closure, rubber balls, wooden objects, carved jade pieces, seeds, bones, not debris offerings. The tunnel's closing was a ceremony. At the end, the passage opens into 3 chambers arranged in a roughly triangular plan. These are the terminal chambers. When Gomez's team reached them in 2017, they were the first people to see them in approximately 1,800 years. The chambers contained approximately 22 gallons of liquid mercury, pooled across the floors in shallow deposits. Mercury does not occur naturally in the Teotihuacan Basin. Geochemical trace analysis of the mercury's isotopic composition traced its origin to deposits near Querétaro State, approximately 200 miles to the northwest. Someone transported liquid mercury across 200 miles of terrain in sealed containers and poured it into a room beneath a pyramid. Mercury is toxic. Handling it in quantity without modern protective equipment is dangerous. The decision to do so was not incidental. It was deliberate, specific, and logistically demanding in a way that rules out accident. Also in the chambers, more than 50,000 individual artifacts. Jade figurines, pyrite mirrors polished to a reflective surface, used in Mesoamerican divination ritual for seeing what ordinary light cannot show. Shells from both the Pacific and Gulf coasts, animal bones representing cosmologically significant species, obsidian blades, fragments of offerings of human origin. The pyrite mirrors placed in a sealed underground chamber at the center of a major sacred pyramid. In the dark, where their reflective surfaces served no practical viewing purpose, chosen not for function, but for what they represented about site itself. What was not found? A burial. No royal tomb, no sarcophagus, no individual remains consistent with an interment of the scale the tunnel's preparation would normally imply, prepared with extraordinary care, filled with objects of enormous symbolic and material value, sealed for 1,800 years, empty of the one thing ancient sealed chambers are supposed to contain. Sergio Gomez's interpretation proposes that the mercury represented the primordial underworld ocean of Teotihuacan cosmology, the liquid realm beneath the earth that, in certain Mesoamerican traditions, underlies the visible world as a sacred mirror. The tunnel and its chambers may have been a physical cosmogram, not a tomb, but a constructed model of the underworld, placed deliberately beneath the pyramid at the ceremonial center of one of the largest cities of the ancient world. Some researchers ask whether the combination of liquid mercury transported 200 miles, pyrite mirrors designed to reveal what is hidden, and rubber balls, whose ritual function in Mesoamerican ballgame cosmology connects the living world to the underworld, represents not the burial of a person, but the deliberate activation of a space, a room built to function, cosmologically, not symbolically, not a representation of the underworld. The underworld itself, made present underground. Access to the tunnel and the terminal chambers is restricted to INAH authorized researchers only. Portions of the terminal chambers remain under active micro-excavation, Some areas of the chamber floors have not yet been fully exposed. The tunnel was sealed for 1800 years. No one knows who built Teotihuacan. No one knows what language they spoke. And beneath the pyramid, at the center of their sacred city, they built something that has taken modern archaeologists 14 years to partially open and still cannot fully explain. Half a kilometer north, a second pyramid at Teotihuacan was keeping a different kind of sealed space, one that had been placed there first, then buried under 148 feet of pyramid built around it. Number 7. The Pyramid of the Moon's Inner Offering Vault. Half a kilometer north of the Feathered Serpent's sealed tunnel, at the far end of the Avenue of the Dead, the 2-mile ceremonial spine that runs the length of Teotihuacan, stands the Pyramid of the Moon. It is the second largest structure at the site, its stepped mass rising 148 feet above the valley floor. From its summit, the entire city grid is visible. The perfectly orthogonal layout of avenues and platforms, aligned 15.5 degrees east of north, extending across roughly 9 square miles of engineered urban landscape. The Pyramid of the Moon was not built at once. Archaeological investigation has established that it was constructed in at least 7 sequential phases, spanning approximately 200 BCE to 350 CE, each phase adding a new shell of stone over the previous structure, gradually enlarging the pyramid while burying everything that had come before it inside the growing mass. That layered construction history is what made the discovery of 2004 possible, and what made it so unexpected. In 1998, archaeologist Saburo Sugiyama of Aichi Prefectural University in Japan, working jointly with Ruben Cabrera Castro of INAH, launched the Moon Pyramid Archaeological Project. The project's mandate was to investigate the pyramid's construction sequence and identify what, if anything, the builders had deposited at the boundaries between phases. At major Teotihuacan structures, phase transitions were typically marked by offerings placed at the juncture before the new layer was added. The team drove a tunnel horizontally into the pyramid's base to sample the interior sequence. In the 2004 excavation season, working through the tunnel, the team reached the approximate geometric center of the pyramid's base. At the intersection of the structure's major construction axes, equidistant from the pyramid's 4 sides at its base level, they found a vertical shaft descending from above. The shaft connected multiple construction phases in a single vertical line, converging on a sealed chamber at the base. The chamber was approximately 13 feet square. It had not been disturbed, based on stratigraphic analysis, since approximately 350 CE, 1650 years, before the excavation reached it. The chamber's contents were catalogued carefully. Human remains, at least 12 individuals, in positions indicating sacrifice rather than natural burial. Some with hands bound were placed symmetrically within the space. Animal remains represented 3 specific species: puma, eagle, and serpent, not randomly selected. Each carried a precise cosmological designation in Teotihuacan's symbolic system. Pumas were associated with the night sun and the underworld. Eagles, with the daytime sun and celestial authority. Serpents with the earth, water, and agricultural regeneration. The 3 animals together constitute what scholars identify as the cosmological triad of Teotihuacan's universe, the organized symbols of every major domain of existence, placed together in a sealed room at the pyramid's exact center. Jade figures, obsidian blades, pyrite discs, and shell ornaments accompanied them, arranged with apparent intentional order. The chamber's position was not accidental. It sits directly beneath the vertical axis, connecting the pyramid's apex to its base center, the geometric heart of the structure. Not a byproduct of construction, not a storage deposit placed incidentally between phases. The room that the pyramid was built around, literally 7 successive shells of stone added over 5.5 centuries, each one enclosing and protecting what had been placed at the center first. Sugiyama and Cabrera's findings were published in Latin American Antiquity in 2004. The Moon Pyramid Archaeological Project continued investigating additional phase boundaries in following seasons, finding offering deposits at each major transition, confirming that the central chamber was not a one-time event, but the seed of a repeated ritual practice that governed the pyramid's entire construction sequence. All excavation access is restricted to INAH authorized researchers within the formal project structure. The tunnel system accessing the chamber is classified as structurally sensitive, continued open access risks, physical integrity of the pyramid above, and the preservation of stratigraphic deposits that future scientific methods may be better positioned to analyze. No independent researcher access is currently permitted. In 2017, a muon study of the Pyramid of the Moon, distinct from the Scan pyramids, work at Giza, detected structural anomalies in the pyramid's upper unexcavated portions inconsistent with solid stone construction. Preliminary results were presented at the 2017 annual meeting of the Society for American Archaeology. A formal published paper has not yet appeared. The upper sections of the Moon Pyramid have not been tunneled into. What those sections contain has not been determined. Some researchers ask whether a pyramid conceived from its construction as a series of shells built around a sealed cosmological center represents a fundamentally different design philosophy than a pyramid built as a burial monument. One where the center is not an afterthought, but the entire purpose, and the growing mass above it is not structure but protection. If the chamber was placed first, and the pyramid was built around it, then the pyramid did not enclose a room. It was a room's guardian. And whatever the muon study found in the upper levels may be a second layer of the same intention, something placed first, enclosed permanently, and left for whoever was patient enough to build the instruments to find it. The Pyramid of the Moon was built 7 times over. It is still keeping most of what is inside it. On the Yucatan Peninsula, another pyramid is keeping 3 versions of itself. Number 8. El Castillo's third temple and sacred cenote. El Castillo, the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, is one of the most photographed structures in the Western Hemisphere. Its 9-stepped terraces, its 4 staircases each of 91 steps, plus the platform at the summit producing the 365-day calendar total, and its equinox shadow serpent effect, have made it the defining image of Maya architecture in global popular consciousness. It appears to be what it looks like, a single pyramid, built once, standing alone above the Yucatan scrubland. 3 separate discoveries made between the 1930s and 2019 have progressively dismantled that image. The structure most people photograph is the outermost layer of at least 3 nested pyramids, built one inside the next, sitting directly above a water-filled sinkhole that no one has entered, and that was very likely there before the first stone of the pyramid was laid. The first layer was peeled back in the 1930s, when Mexican archaeologists excavating from the exterior confirmed the presence of an older inner pyramid, El Castillo A, enclosed completely within the outer shell. This inner structure, documented formally by INH archaeologist Jose Arosa Peniche and subsequently studied in limited fashion, is accessible via a narrow interior staircase. Tourists were permitted to climb it until 2006, when INAH closed the passage permanently due to structural stress from visitor traffic and humidity damage. The inner pyramid contains 2 of the most significant ritual objects found at Chichen Itza, a Chak Mul figure, a reclining stone figure with a bowl on its stomach for receiving offerings, and a jaguar throne. The throne is a full-scale carved jaguar painted red, with 73 jade discs embedded in the stone to simulate a jaguar's spotted coat and obsidian eyes fitted into the carved sockets. It faces the interior staircase as if waiting. It is one of the finest ritual objects in all of Maya archaeology. It sits in a room inside a pyramid, and virtually no one has seen it since 2006. In 2016, researchers from UNAM Mexico's National Autonomous University, led by geophysicist René Chavez Segura, applied electrical resistivity tomography to the ground beneath El Castillo. ERT introduces electrical current into the soil through surface probes and measures resistance at different depths. Denser materials, like solid rock, resist differently than water-saturated voids or open cavities. The results showed a cenote cavity approximately 65 feet below the surface, roughly 80 feet in diameter, entirely water-filled. The cavity was positioned directly beneath the pyramid's center. The study was published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2016. Cenote's natural limestone sinkholes, formed when the porous bedrock of the Yucatan Peninsula collapses into underground water channels, were the most sacred geographical features in Maya cosmology. They were understood as portals to Xibalba, the Maya underworld, the point where the living world and the realm of the dead met at the water's edge. Chichen Itza is built around the sacred cenote to its north, into which jade, gold, rubber, and human remains were cast as offerings across centuries of ritual use. The discovery that El Castillo's architects had placed their most important pyramid directly above a second, concealed cenote, building the temple above the portal, rather than merely beside it, is consistent with deliberate cosmological design rather than coincidence of location. The cenote beneath El Castillo has never been entered, not sampled, not touched. No physical access point has been identified. Any attempt to reach it would require drilling or excavating vertically through approximately 65 feet of stone and the pyramid's foundation layers, or laterally from surrounding ground. Both options would risk the structural integrity of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Mexico's INAH has stated explicitly that no entry or excavation is authorized. In 2019, researchers from INAH's Gran Acuífero Maya project, led by archaeologist Guillermo de Anda, announced that additional non-invasive imaging had detected evidence of a third, still older structure beneath El Castillo A, a smaller, earlier pyramid enclosed completely within the second, which is itself enclosed within the outer El Castillo. 3 pyramids nested concentrically. The innermost has not been physically reached since the second pyramid was built around it. Its dimensions and contents are known only from imaging data. Some researchers ask whether the deliberate layering of 3 successive pyramids over a sacred cenote represents not construction, pragmatism, building over an existing site because the location was convenient, but a researches that sustained multi-generational cosmological program in which each new pyramid was conceived specifically as a seal over what came before, and the cenote at the foundation was the fixed sacred point. The entire sequence was designed to protect and to mark, not a pyramid built above a cenote. A system in which the cenote was always the center, and the pyramids were its successive enclosures. The outermost pyramid is a UNESCO World Heritage Site visited by several million people each year. The innermost has not been entered since before the outer 2 were built. The cenote beneath all 3 has never been entered at all. 3 layers of pyramid above a sacred lake, and none of the 4 spaces freely accessible. In northern Sudan, a different kind of inaccessibility has preserved a different kind of sealed royal chamber for over 2,000 years. Number 9. The flooded royal chambers at Nuri. In northern Sudan, approximately 220 miles north of Khartoum, on the west bank of the Nile, there is a necropolis that most people in the world have never heard of. It contains more pyramid tombs than Egypt's Giza plateau. They are steeper, narrower, built in the Nubian style, distinct in proportion from the broad Egyptian form, but they are unambiguously pyramids, and the people buried beneath them were, for a significant period of ancient history, among the most powerful rulers on earth. The royal necropolis at Nuri was the burial ground of the kings and queens of the ancient Nubian kingdom of Napata from approximately 690 BCE to 300 BCE. It holds the tombs of 21 kings and 52 queens. Among those kings is Pharaoh Taharka, a man who ruled not merely Nubia, but all of Egypt simultaneously. The Nubian pharaoh whose name appears in the Bible in the second book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 9, as Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, who marched his forces north to challenge the Assyrian advance on Jerusalem. Taharka's pyramid at Nuri, designated Nuri I, is the largest at the site. Its base measures approximately 170 feet on each side. Like all the pyramids at Nuri, it was built above a subterranean burial chamber excavated into the bedrock below a shaft, descending beneath the pyramid base, to a vaulted chamber, accessed via a descending staircase, sealed with heavy stone blocking slabs. Taharka's burial chamber was among the finest built in the Nubian tradition. Multiple antechambers, carved column bases, a vaulted ceiling, walls bearing religious texts. In 1916 and 1917, archaeologist George Reisner of Harvard University, working for the joint Harvard University Museum of Fine Arts Boston expedition, excavated the Nuri royal tombs, including Taharka's. He found burial objects, documented the architectural sequence, and recorded what the chambers contained. He also found that some of the chambers were already partially flooded. The regional water table in the area of Nuri, sits close enough to the surface that the lowest portions of the subterranean burial chambers had taken on groundwater. Reisner worked around the flooding with the equipment available in 1917, but was unable to fully excavate the deepest sections. In the century since Reisner's visit, the situation has worsened significantly. Regional groundwater levels have risen, a combination of Nile flood management changes, agricultural irrigation in the surrounding region, and broader climatic shifts. The burial chambers at Nuri are now fully submerged. The descending staircases fill with water before reaching the burial level. Reisner's documentation tells us what the chambers look like architecturally. It does not tell us what remains on their floors, what condition the objects he catalogued are in a century later, or what the 52 queens' burial chambers, which Reisner did not excavate at all, contain. Picture what it looks like to navigate a flooded burial chamber in an ancient pyramid by camera light. The ROV's beam illuminating carved stone walls through murky groundwater, the accumulated silt of a century on the chamber floor, the shapes of objects resting undisturbed where they were placed 2,300 years ago. That is what archaeologist Pierce Paul Kreisman of the University of Arizona documented in 2019. Working under the auspices of the American Research Center in Egypt and with National Geographic Society support, Kreisman deployed an underwater remotely operated vehicle into the flooded passageways of the Nuri royal chambers. The ROV was the first visual documentation of those spaces since Reisner. What it found was unexpectedly intact. The chambers had not collapsed. Silt had accumulated on the floors, but the walls and ceilings were standing. Artifacts were visible objects resting on chamber floors, stone fittings of the burial architecture identifiable in the camera footage. Not destroyed, preserved. Low oxygen levels in stagnant groundwater inhibit the biological decay processes that destroy organic material in open air. The flooding that made the chambers inaccessible had also protected them. The ROV saw. It could not touch. No human diver can safely operate at the depth and in the confined passages of an ancient burial chamber. With intact ceiling vaults and silt floors, the disturbance risk to fragile deposits and the structural risk to ancient masonry make human entry effectively impossible with current technique. Since 2019, access has become a second, independent layer of restriction. Sudan's political environment has undergone severe disruption. The 2019 revolution that removed President Omar al-Bashir was followed by a transitional period, a 2021 military coup, and ongoing armed conflict that has made large-scale international archaeological work in Sudan deeply difficult and in some regions impossible to coordinate safely. Kreisman's team has not returned to Nuri for continued excavation. Some researchers ask whether the 52 queens' burial chambers at Nuri, never excavated by Reisner, never imaged by the ROV, their internal architecture completely undocumented, may contain material that substantially revises what we know about the Nubian 25th dynasty's reign over Egypt, a period of Nubian rule over the ancient world's most famous civilization that remains largely absent from mainstream historical curricula, not sealed deliberately, not protected by institutional decision, simply never entered not once by anyone since the blocking stones were placed. The water that preserved those chambers is the same water that prevents anyone from seeing what is inside them. Some of the least known royal burial spaces on Earth are open to the sky. They are just 30 feet underwater. One final chamber remains. It is not in Mesoamerica or Sudan. It is 100 feet below the most famous pyramid in the world, at the bottom of a passage carved before any of the chambers above it were built. Number 10. The Subterranean Chambers Descending Shaft. To reach the lowest known space inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, you enter through the original entrance on the pyramid's north face, the one the builders used, not the forced tunnel carved by Caliph al-Mamun's workers in the 9th century CE. You pass through a low doorway into the descending passage, approximately 3.5 feet high, roughly 3.5 feet wide, sloping downward at 26 degrees for 345 feet through solid limestone. Walking it requires a sustained forward lean, shoulders close to the angled walls, the cold of deep rock replacing the heat of the plateau above. The passage is original construction cut from the living rock of the plateau and lined with casing blocks, angled with a precision Flinders Petrie's 1880 survey confirmed is accurate to fractions of a degree from true north alignment. At the bottom of the descending passage, the slope levels out, and the passage continues horizontally, a short distance further into the bedrock below the pyramid. Then it opens into a chamber. The subterranean chamber is carved 100 feet below the pyramid's base, directly into the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. It is the lowest known point in the pyramid's interior. Its floor plan is roughly rectangular, approximately 46 feet east to west, 27 feet north to south, ceiling height around 11 feet. Unlike the king's chamber above it, lined in red Aswan granite, fitted with granite beams of extraordinary precision, polished to a near-reflective surface, and unlike the queen's chamber above that, finished in smooth white limestone, the subterranean chamber is rough. The walls are rough-hewn rock. The floor is uneven. The ceiling shows tool marks and unsmoothness that stand in jarring contrast to the millimeter-level tolerances of every other measured surface in the pyramid above. This is the room archaeologists have described for 150 years as unfinished. Petrie noted it in his 1883 publication. The Pyramids and Temples of Giza, the foundational survey, reference every subsequent measurement of Giza has used as its baseline. The mainstream interpretation is that the subterranean chamber was the original intended burial location for Khufu, abandoned when the design was changed during construction and the burial chamber was relocated higher into the pyramid's mass. The rough appearance is evidence of the abandonment. The workers stopped mid-cut, moved their operation upward, and left the bedrock room in whatever state it was in when the decision was made. That explanation is reasonable, and it is also the only explanation the evidence requires, which is not quite the same thing as the only explanation the evidence supports. In the floor of the subterranean chamber is a pit. It is approximately 22 feet long and roughly 6 feet wide, cut into the bedrock below the chamber's already carved floor. The pit descends approximately 10 feet. At its bottom, a narrow horizontal shaft, roughly 2.5 feet square, extends northward into the bedrock for approximately 53 feet before terminating. There is no chamber at the end of the shaft. No feature, no carved surface, no architectural element of any identifiable purpose. The shaft simply stops. Petrie documented both the pit and the shaft in 1883. No formal excavation of the pit floor below Petrie's accessible depth has ever been authorized. The shaft has been entered by various researchers over the decades, but has not been the subject of systematic investigation. Between 2012 and 2019, access to the subterranean chamber was restricted entirely by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities during structural stabilization work on the descending passage. Access has since been partially restored for visitor groups through the pyramid's modern entrance infrastructure, but formal excavation access, the kind that would permit investigation of the pit's lower extent or the shaft's terminus, has not been authorized. Some researchers ask whether a chamber in a pyramid, built to sub-millimeter tolerances at every other measured surface, a pyramid whose base sides vary by less than 2 inches across 755 feet, and whose casing stone joints Petrie described as finer than optical. Work can have an unfinished room at its lowest level by accident, rather than by design, and whether the shaft that runs 53 feet northward into the bedrock and stops without explanation was a feature of abandonment, or a feature of purpose whose purpose is not recorded anywhere. A change of plan leaves rough walls. It does not typically produce a 53-foot horizontal shaft into the bedrock with nothing at its end. 10 sealed spaces, 5 countries. A muon detected void above the grand gallery that no one has entered. A second sealed door in a shaft that a robot found 22 years ago. A new cavity in the bent pyramid that was discovered in a building archaeologists thought they had already fully mapped. A Nobel laureate's inconclusive scan of Khafre that newer technology has not been permitted to revisit at equivalent resolution. A 3.5-mile sealed underworld beneath the world's oldest stone building. A mercury chamber opened after 1800 years that still isn't fully excavated. A pyramid built around its own cosmological center. 3 nested pyramids above an untouched sacred lake. Flooded royal burial chambers in the desert, intact and unreachable. And a shaft at the bottom of everything that points north into the rock and stops without saying why. These are not the spaces of civilizations that didn't understand what they were building. They are the spaces of people who understood exactly what they were doing and who built to last long enough for whoever came next to eventually find them and then to wait, at the door, for permission that has not arrived. If that gap between what has been found and what has been opened is as striking to you as it is to us, subscribe. There is more of this where it came from. Leave a comment letting us know where you are watching from. And if you know someone who finds unanswered questions more interesting than settled answers, send this to them. The shaft at the bottom of the Great Pyramid is still pointing north. We may never know what it was pointing toward,